Good. All right. So, like I said, let's step back for a second. I know, we've done the arthropods, but I'm going to move back, and now we're not going too far back. Because remember, we're still dealing with that group of organisms, those protostomes. It actually should be written in here, and I didn't bring my pen with me today to school, so I don't have the way to write on the screen. So I have to use my finger. But these down here, those are the protostomes. All right, the deuterostomes, which we'll talk about later on, these are all the protostomes. So that'd be another classification there. And we've gone through the one group of protostomes, the Lophotrochozoa, the flatworms, the rotifers, the mollusks, the annelids. And we've switched now into the other group, what they call the ectozoa. And remember the reason why they're called the ectozoa, this is the group that molts. That process of molting is known as ecdysis. So we know that really well, in terms of crustaceans, lobsters, and shrimp and all that sort of stuff. And, of course, many insects that you know that molt. But you might not know there are other critters out there that molt, and one of those is the nematode. So let's talk about the nematode first. Now, if you remember very early on, I told you a few classes ago that years ago we used to kind of lump all the worms together in one group. Again, it had a lot to do with what we talked about since the beginning of the semester. It looked alike, so therefore they must be related to one another. But you all know by now, you're much more sophisticated than that now to realize that that's not really a good criteria. Let's take a look at this nematode worm. One of the first things you notice about it when you look at it, one of the major distinguishing characteristics between it and say the earthworm, the other worms, is the segmentation, right? There's no evidence of segmentation in nematodes. They are unsegmented organisms. They're quite species diverse, though. 25,000 species, maybe 20 times more than that. They're found in all kinds of environments. Very important in terms of agricultural aspects. Many times nematodes are prey or parasites on agricultural products. If you look down there at the lower bottom right, that's actually a picture of some plant roots, and those are all little red things, are all the nematodes that are all over the plant roots. So a lot of nematodes in the soil. Some of them do good, some of them do good work, and then there are, as I said, the bad apples in the group that cause the parasite and the predation problems that we see with it. Nematodes are known by this thing called a tube within a tube body plan. And basically, the alimentary canal is the digestive canal, folks. But basically, what we mean by a tube within a tube body plan is if we looked at a nematode in cross-section, there would be the outside and there would be the inside. That's about it. In other words, there's really nothing else. There really isn't too much else in the body cavity of a nematode. It's basically nothing more than that digestive system, the alimentary canal, and the reproductive parts. That's the only two things you find in these organisms. They're really, since there are parasites, like many parasites, they're the way they digest and process food can be very simplified. You remember in the tapeworms, they just absorb food through their skin, right? They have no mouth, they have no digestive system, no pharynx or anything like that at all. So parasites, what they'll do oftentimes is, as evolution goes on with the parasites, is they'll lose some of these functions that are unnecessary. I don't need to be able to digest my own food if all I need to do is soak it up through my skin, right? Like the tapeworms do. The nematodes are similar in that regard. Parasites, now they do have like I said, a digestive system, but the only other thing that you find in nematodes, in addition to the tube that runs down the middle, are the reproductive organs, the male and the reproductive organs. That's the only difference. That's the only thing you're going to find. There's nothing else. There's very simple in terms of getting rid of nitrogenous waste. It's all done through diffusion. These things are going to have to stay small. They do have a cuticle on the outside, which has to be gotten rid of, and that's why they're in the ectozoa group. The flexible cuticle that has to be gotten rid of through this process of ecdysis. Vinegar worms, which can live in vinegar, hence the reason they're named vinegar worms. You see on the right, they're another example of nematodes. The more common nematodes that you might see, and if you work in a vet clinic, you've probably seen these before because they're relatively some of the more common type of worms that organisms or cats and dogs get. But the nematode, that nematode is the one down below, the Ascaris. That's the genus of the nematodes, and they are sexually dimorphic. You'll notice in the picture, females generally tend to be larger, Males are usually smaller and thinner, and distinctively males have this hook at the end. And that's a characteristic of that group. The largest nematode on Earth, we talked about the largest organism being a fungus. The largest nematode on Earth is actually one that's a parasite found in sperm whale placentas that can grow up to 9 meters, 27, 30 feet long. A lot of marine mammals, when they're born, are already born with parasites. There are a number of parasites that can actually make the jump across the placental wall. So if the mother has parasites, then the offspring will have parasites. And nematodes is one of them, especially in the sperm whales. So you're already born with these infested parasites. So what do we say out in the wild? Life is a little bit much dirtier. You're going to deal with parasites and predation and disease. It's not quite the same when you think about living in an area where the parasites aren't such an issue. Now, we, of course, are affected by nematodes and parasites as well. There's about 50 species that are pathological. The real common one, or the one you might hear the most about, is the trichinella worm, which is over there on the right. I got a picture of it. And what it does is it encysts itself in the muscle tissue of its host, causing something called trichinosis. So you can see in that picture, there's the muscle tissue and then the encysted juveniles. You, as humans, you can get trichinosis, which will do the same thing to you that it's doing in this, what is this? I don't know what this muscle tissue is down below, maybe pork or something like that. But you can get these nematodes as well by eating hosts in which the meat has not been cooked properly. That's why it's always important to cook pork and some wild game, to cook it very well, because that will destroy these nematode cysts. But eating raw food, of course, is a good way to get them. And you can see that as they insist in the musculature, they can cause all kinds of problems you could probably imagine. Pinworms are another nematode that is a problematic, although not a devastating infestation of parasites to get. About 30% of children in the United States have had pinworms at one time in their life. The symptom is anal itching. The reason why the anal itching is, if you look on the right, I've got the life cycle of the pinworm. Where do I want to start? Let's start with number 2. So the embryonic eggs are ingested by a human. In children, what that happens a lot is because children put lots of things in their mouth, like dirt, and many times those eggs, nematodes living in the dirt, many times they'll ingest some of those eggs. When digested, the larvae then hatches in the small intestines and eventually migrates and makes its way to the cecum, the large intestines, and they're sexually dimorphic. You can see in the picture. The itching, the anal itching that's caused is at night. The females, the gravid females, the pregnant females, the ones that have eggs, will actually move out to the perianal region. If you're thinking, the perianal region is around your anus, usually just on the outside, and they'll lay eggs. The laying of the eggs is what's causing the itching in the children. So if you have a child with a severe case of butt itch, you take it to the doctor, and what he is going to do is take a sample from down in that region to see if indeed he does see any signs of these pinworms. But again, a pinworm is common. 30% of the kids get it, but it's not. You're not going to die from pinworms. Roundworms, like we talked about before, the ascaris, about 1/6 of the world population is infested with that, or infected. I wouldn't say infested. Infested's a little bit more than just being infected. And sanitation is the most part. Sanitation, roundworms are more commonly found in areas in which the sanitation is an issue. Now, there is one nematode worm that causes far-reaching effects, and this is typically amongst a group of tropical diseases, but the one that I want to talk about is known as filariasis. Filariasis is caused by the roundworm Wucheria bancrofti. Wucheria bancrofti causes the disease or the condition known as elephantiasis. Now, before we go any further, it's not elephantitis, all right? It's elephantiasis. And let's talk how this works. Down below is the filarial worm. This is the worm that causes elephantiasis. Oh, by the way, let me step back for a second. This is actually an X-ray of a woman in an area of the world in which sanitation was a problem, and all that white that's glowing is her infestation of roundworms. So that can cause problems in the intestinal system. It backs it up, right? But back to this filarial worm down there, what it does is it gets in your body and it actually begins to grow, multiply, and congest the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is the system that drains fluid back from your extremities to your heart. You have lymph nodes in your armpits and your chest. You have them in your groin area. So if you see that picture of that fellow standing there, his left leg, quite obviously bigger than the other. The reason why his left leg is so big is because he's suffering from edema. Edema is a collection of fluid which can occur for a variety of reasons. In this particular case, the reason why he's got that edema is because there is an elephantiasis or a filarial worm infestation in his lymph nodes in that groin area. And when they are infesting the lymph nodes, they block them up so that the fluid can't drain back from the leg into the heart, and so it gets stopped up, and then it grows and becomes large, and I guess that's where the elephant part comes into play there. You can get it in extremities, arms and legs. There was a case of a chief in New Guinea who had it in his scrotum, and the edema was in his scrotum. His scrotum had grown so large he had to walk around with a wheelbarrow to carry his scrotum. I guess that's why he was chief, right? I'm chief because my testicles have to be carried around in a wheelbarrow. Cannot be comfortable. Gotta be hard to sit too. Yeah, if you look online, you can find a picture of this fellow or other people who have had elephantiasis in that region as well. I saw one case of elephantiasis in all my years when I was in the Navy in Sri Lanka. I saw a fellow, homeless beggar person on the side of the road that was clearly had elephantiasis, and actually both of his legs. All right, so that's it for the nematodes. Let's go ahead and jump back into the arthropods. Any questions on anything more we need to talk about nematodes? All right. Tons of arthropods. They're segmented. Characteristics include the segmentation, and I want to emphasize again with arthropods, it's all about the diversity of appendages. That's their hallmark, if you will. Because of their segmentation and the fact that they can combine segments and they can add different appendages to segments, we get a lot of diversity. Think of it again in that terms of the Hox gene. Remember the Hox gene is a gene that animals have that determines where appendages go, what kind of appendage and where it goes. So we have this duplication and shuffling of Hox genes that occurs as we move into the arthropod group, and the result of that is we get all these different kinds of appendages. And when I'm talking about appendages, folks, I'm not just talking about walking kinds of things. Walking legs are appendages. Swimming, the swimmerettes or the swimming appendages. The antenna, those are appendages. The pinchers are appendages. All the little mouth parts that you looked at, the maxilla, the maxilliped, those were all modified appendages, if you will, modified legs to some degree. So that's a very important distinction or very important characteristic we find among. Oops, wrong button. Sorry. Try that one more time. All right, folks, I closed the slides and I didn't mean to do that. So you get it. It's all about the segmentation. It's all about the diversity that comes about because of all the different things you can do with appendages. It's kind of like accessorizing, you know. You could add winged appendages, swimming appendages, walking appendages, jointed appendages. There you go. They're all jointed. Arthro is joint, right? When you have arthroscopic knee surgery. I guess you don't really need to say arthroscopic knee, do you? Where am I? Right. There we go. I think this is pretty close to where we stopped last time, wasn't it? We were talking about the different sensory systems, the respiratory system. Marine arthropods usually going to have gills. Gills are the most effective way of breathing in water, unless you can just simply, you're small enough, you can simply use diffusion. Some tiny arthropods, of course, can use that diffusion, Now, terrestrial arthropods have trachea, which we talked about, like you have a trachea, and they just get smaller and smaller and smaller as little tracheoles. And what this does for the benefit of these arthropods is it makes them very efficient, because every single cell in their body is not so far away from one of these tracheoles that diffusion can't work. Remember, we said about diffusion, if you're small, that works, but when you get too big, diffusion won't work because the cells on the inside won't get enough water or nutrients or whatever the case is being diffused, and they also can't get rid of their waste. But the arthropods had found this ingenious way of using these tracheoles, and these tracheoles basically are air tunnels, canals, if you will, that get smaller and smaller and smaller, that deliver the gases so close to each one of those cells that no cell is too far away that diffusion can't work. So the material diffuses at the end of the tracheoles, but the cells are so ingrained with all these tracheoles that tracheoles are never too far away from the cells. Spiders and the horseshoe crab have what we call book lungs, or maybe in the horseshoe crab we ought to call them book gills, but book gills and book lungs look like you see in the picture. They're basically, each individual tissue is a gill, and we just have several gills stacked on top of one another. Remember I said they look like a book because of pages of a book. Remember, once again, the trachea have valves. They can close those valves to prevent water loss. That's very good for organisms living on land. I have a very efficient excretory system. If you live in the water, you can use your gills, can be used as an excretory system. Aquatic insects use them. A fish also use their gills to do that as well. Terrestrial insects have those Malpighian tubules that I was talking about, those yellow tubes that bring in the salt, the water, the nitrogenous waste, which is what you want to leave. And a little bit later down in the rectum, there's a mechanism by which reabsorption occurs of the important stuff, the salt and water, so that only the nitrogenous waste and, of course, the fecal material is gone. This here at the end again is a manifestation or an adaptation for living on land, right? Efficient conservation of water. Okay, let's, we went into the chelicerates, didn't we? Yeah, we talked about the spiders, we talked about chiggers and red bugs and how lovely they are. This is a Florida scorpion over here, folks. We do have a scorpion in Florida. It's called the Florida bark, B-A-R-K, scorpion. I don't think it barks. I used to see them a lot over at Seminole State College when I taught there at night. I would come out underneath the lights when all the insects would gather, the toads would gather, and so would the scorpions. The scorpions would be there too. All right, we did that. I think there we go. We did the spiders, we did the dog ticks, the black widows. Yeah, we talked about that. Next slide. Here's the new stuff. Yeah, that's what I thought. Hold on a second, my slides are playing games with me. Okay, so what we're going to move on to now is the myriapods. And I told you in class when we were looking at the different lab samples that, you needed to know the groups, the crustaceans, the insects, the arachnids, and the myriapods. And I said the way to remember who myriapods are is myriapods have a myriad of feet. Pod is feet, and myriad means a lot. So these are the organisms that have lots of feet or lots of legs. So we're talking about the centipedes and the millipedes. The difference between centipedes and millipedes, now milli, if you remember from your Bio 1 class, means 1,000, and centi means 100. We're not saying that they have 1,000 or 100 legs. They don't. But milli, or 1,000, is more than centi or 100. So organisms like millipedes have lots of legs, actually 2 legs per segment. Basically, the way these critters kind of grow is the head region is followed by a bunch of segments, and as they grow, they just keep adding segments to the end. And in a millipede, each one of those segments is going to have 2 legs. In centipedes, each one of those segments, as you can see down below, only has 1 leg. All right, so that's the difference. You should recognize that millipede in the upper right. We saw that at Pear Park. It's a real common millipede. Does anybody remember the name of that millipede? Ivory. Very good, Jennifer. Excellent. See, you guys learned something already. That's awesome. All right, myriapods, millipedes, and centipedes are gonorchid. You remember gonorchid means that we have males and females, okay? So it's kind of the same as being dioecious. Internal fertilization, land dwellers. Land dwellers, when you are moving on land, internal fertilization becomes the best way to survive because it protects the eggs, especially from that drying out environment. Then they lay eggs. They're all terrestrial in this group. Centipedes are carnivorous. Yeah, they are. Look at those fangs. Poison fangs, oftentimes with toxins at the tip of the fangs. Centipedes are dangerous to the organisms they hunt, and there are some species of centipedes that can be harmful to humans. I think the one in the lower right is a Florida centipede. I've not seen a Florida centipede in a while, but I believe if I'm right. I usually try to pick pictures of organisms that you might see around here, so I think that's a Florida version. Centipedes are carnivorous. Millipedes are herbivorous. That's why I could pick up that ivory millipede and not worry about it. Yeah, have you seen one? The centipede? They're pretty distinctive with that color. He said, I don't know. Yeah, you might have. Old pieces of wood laying around on property, flip over some of those old pieces of wood. Good chance you find a centipede there. Used to be a lot more centipedes when I was a kid in Texas. We would, because we're rotten kids, we would gather up the centipedes and scorpions and put them into somebody's lunchbox and let them duke it out, and fight it out. Is it inside the house? I've had scorpions inside the house before, though. If you're wondering who won between the centipede and the scorpion, neither one. One of them would always jump out and leave. One of them would say, I'm done with this. Now, if you're herbivorous and you don't have the fangs, how do you protect yourself? Well, you can stink, right? Remember I said vultures, turkey vultures, one of the ways that they protect themselves a bit being harassed, they throw up on you. Well, in the case of the millipedes, as a human, you got to use that next time. Someone's ever harassing you, and say, throw up on them, see if that works. I bet it does. And if someone's trying to rob you and you threw up on them, you would think that they would run away, right? Maybe the turkey vulture's got something going there. Anyway, millipedes defend themselves because they stink. They have these paired glands in each segment that secrete this really offensive smell. Some species actually produce not something that just stinks, but something dangerous like cyanide gas. And everybody knows what cyanide does, right? Cyanide can kill you very quickly. Okay, up at the top now in the red, we're going to look at the pan crustaceans. We're not going to look at the Remipedians. The Remipedians is a crustacean group, not sure exactly where they fit. That's the dashed line. We're going to stick with the typical crustaceans and then the insects. This pan crustacean name is actually a relatively new name. They've lumped the crustaceans and the insects together. Again, for the lab practical, though, I need you to know not chelicerates, but arachnids. Myriapods, crustaceans, and then insects. Okay, so let's move on now into the crustaceans. Crustaceans are largely marine. There are some freshwater, for example, that copepod, that's a freshwater crustacean. They have 3 pairs of appendages that are modified for chewing. You see that? So they've taken those appendages, and crustaceans have modified. You saw them in lab when you were looking at the crayfish. Some of those appendages are used for manipulating and holding prey. Like I said, if you ever looked at them up close, they got this stuff going on around their mouth. Looks like they're really, really busy moving stuff around. Those are modified appendages. Various numbers and pairs of legs. They can diffuse across their gills if they're larger, across their cuticle or their skin if they're smaller. Right? Again, those are all based upon physics. Right? Can't be real big and expect diffusion to work. They are gonorchid, males and females. And interestingly enough, no matter how many diverse kinds of crustaceans we have, we go back to that old thing that we've been talking about all semester long, that if you have a similarity of development or a similarity of a larval form in these diverse groups of organisms, that is a pretty much a slam dunk indicating a relatively close relationship. All crustaceans, no matter what they look like, freshwater, saltwater, crabs, lobsters, that copepod, This is krill, very important food source, right? Many of the whales, especially down around the Southern Ocean, feed upon krill. But any of those kinds of organisms all have what's called the Nauplius larvae. This is a Nauplius larvae. That's what it looks like, and this is what it looks like in real life. So no matter what crustacean you talk about, they start off with this Nauplius larvae, which again gives us the idea that, you know, we have a common similarity. Now, in the middle, I want to point out, we've been calling these things roly-polies for years, haven't we? Everybody's seen roly-polies. You mess with them, they roll themselves up. They're actually called pill bugs, and pill bugs are not bugs at all, but crustaceans. So there's a little interesting fact you can impress your friends with when they're out there. I don't know. Maybe we're too old to play with pill bugs. We used to always play with them all the time. Messed with all kinds of organisms out there. I was notorious on my school for catching lizards, so I would catch all these lizards, and other kids who couldn't catch lizards, they would actually give me money. I would sell the lizards to them. These are just lizards I caught in my backyard. Oh, that's so cool. I could never catch something like that. I'm like, so I'd sell them. Extra lunch money. I agree, Thomas. I agree. You know, Jennifer, you're right, too. I haven't seen pill bugs in a while either. I don't know if there's a pill bug die-off or what. Yeah, but I agree. You're never too old to get down and play with the critters. Now, the crustaceans that you're probably more familiar with are crustaceans that we call decapods. And they're called decapods because they have 10 feet. And if you remember your crayfish the other day, they did have 10 feet. You're like, wait a minute, they only had 4 walking legs, so that would be 8, 4 on either side. But the cheliped, right, the pincher, remember, we're not going to call it a pincher if I ask you to identify it. We're going to call it a cheliped. The cheliped is another foot. You know, it's a modified thoracic appendage. Same thing I've been talking about all along. So you get the 4 walking legs and the 1 cheliped on each side, and that makes the 10. There's that calcium carbonate stuff again. Calcium carbonate is a very common material that's used in marine organisms. It's found in the shells of mollusks. It's very effective at building exoskeletons on aquatic arthropods. But of course, with that exoskeleton, remember, you do gotta get rid of it. You do molt. The carapace. All right. How do I explain this to you? I don't have the right picture up, but that's okay. You remember yesterday I pointed out the cephalothorax of the crayfish. The cephalothorax was the head, and then the thoracic region, the chest region, right? And the abdomen was behind that. The shell that you cut off, that thing that you cut off, that was in the cephalothorax region, but that thing you pulled off that you cut across the sutures and the gills were underneath, that's called a carapace. That term is also used in other places too. Turtle shells are often called carapace as well. So carapace is not unique just to to crustaceans. It basically means a covering. Okay. Swimmerets at the back, which are used for swimming. I showed you the gravid female. They're used for reproduction as well. The blue crabs up above. There's a male and a female, and they are sexually dimorphic. If any of you are familiar with blue crabs, you know you can tell the difference by looking at the abdomen. The carapace, the crab carapace, which is the shell again. In the case of the female, the abdominal area that you got there is going to be much broader, okay? And then in the male, the abdominal region is much narrower. I'm talking about that little line that moves up the front there. You see, these two things are the same thing. In the females, it's, that's right, absolutely. Yeah, so in the females, they're going to have a wider abdominal carapace versus in the males, it's much more vestigial, like in the lobsters and the shrimp. The reason why this is, especially in the case of like the blue crabs, is that abdomen, sort of like the swimmerets on the crayfish, the abdomen is used to carry the eggs, so they're going to have a broader abdomen, be able to carry all those eggs. So now you can sex what? Roundworms, crayfish, and lobster, as well as blue crabs. And all kinds of things today. All right. Click. Barnacles. Fools everybody. You look at a barnacle and it's got a shell. Okay, there's a barnacle right here. What group of organisms do you immediately want to put those in if they have a shell? Oh, I know, obviously they're not in that group. Yeah, they look like mollusks. Shell, you think mollusks, right? If you look a little bit more closely, though, look at this picture up here. Look at the appendages that are coming out of the barnacle shell. These are feeding appendages, okay? These are feeding appendages. They use them to capture prey, kind of like the cilia and the rotifer and all that sort of stuff. But if you look very closely, you notice those appendages are jointed. See, those are jointed, segmented appendages. So the shell in the barnacle doesn't mean it's related to mollusks. The jointed appendages means it's an arthropod. Now, you know, I got to do it one more time before the semester's over. What's the term we use to refer to the fact that barnacles have shells? Why do barnacles have shells even though they're not mollusks? What's that phrase we use to refer to organisms that end up having similar characteristics even though they're not related? There you go. And of course, the shells of the barnacles would do the same thing they do for the mollusks. They're for protection. Barnacles are the things that very often you see. Yeah, there you go. Very often that you see growing on whales, all those little lumps of barnacles. They actually burrow down into the blubber layer. It appears that other than the hydrodynamic drag that's caused, that the barnacles don't really affect them all that much. They burrow down into the blubber layer, but the blubber layer in the whales is not very, it's not innervated. It doesn't have a lot of nerves, so they don't feel any discomfort or pain from that. This is the larvae of a barnacle. Barnacles are sessile, but they do have a larval form that can drift around and disperse, just like we talked about, with this little feathery appendages for catching food. Now, barnacles are hermaphrodites, right? Male and female. But remember, just because you're a hermaphrodite doesn't mean you want to stick with that kind of reproduction, because reproduction as a hermaphrodite means that you're fertilizing your own eggs, and that happens, but you want to avoid it. But how does one barnacle on one side, of an ecosystem, how does it mate with, say, a female barnacle or a male barnacle on the other side, since it can't pick up and move? And you could deposit your sperm and your eggs into the water, and a lot of critters do that, like sea urchins. That's possible. But then it means stuff is washing all over the place, and there's lots of other fish out there that are feeding on those gametes, and fertilization occurs. They'll feed on the eggs and all that sort of stuff. So, you have to make a lot of those if you're going to use that dispersal. Well, believe it or not, the world's largest penis belongs to barnacles, and that's what you're seeing in the picture on the lower right. That's how they get around that. Since they can't walk over to the female, since they don't want to be distributing their gametes in the water because of the low probability of many of those making it, the barnacle just basically extends his penis out across the way until he finds a female, and then he impregnates her that way. That's something. World's largest critter, what did we say was a mushroom? Who has the world's largest penis? Pound for pound, you will, or whatever scale-wise. It's the barnacle. Those of you out there with penis envy. All right, now, the insects. The insects belong to a group we call the hexapods or hexapoda, which means they have 6 feet. All right? Not 10 like we saw in the decapods, but 6 like we see in the hexapods. Several orders, over 30 orders. I'm only going to approach and talk about a few of the orders of insects. I could spend days, entire years talking about all the different kinds. This is easily one of the most, the most diverse group, the largest group not only in density and diversity. Over half of all named animal species are insects. At any one time, there's a billions, 10 to the 18th alive. These are definitely, when it comes to numbers and diversity, these are the kings of the planet when it comes to that. Now, these guys, again, we have segmentation and we have fusion of segments. So we fuse those segments into body regions. We have a head, right, which is going to be all the sensory organs. The thorax actually should be underneath the head. It shouldn't be indented underneath the head. That's a mistake in the way that slide's made. We have the thorax, which has 3 segments, 2 legs per segment. In the thoracic region, there's sometimes one, or like in the case of the dragonfly, 2 pairs of wings. Now, I said it's all about appendages. Wings are not, well, they are appendages, but they don't arise from the same genetic information that the legs, the pinchers, and all the swimmerettes arise from. So they're not appendages. They're basically nothing more than outgrowths of the body wall. So they grow out of the body wall in that thoracic region. That's where the wings come from, made of chitin and protein. Now, wing evolution, however it came about, was absolutely key to the radiation during the Carboniferous period. Remember, the Carboniferous period was when plants started just going crazy and populating the environment, moving out onto land. And I've told you more than once, not only was it the fungus in the plants that helped, but it was the insects, right? The pollinators. And they moved out on the land. They helped those plants disperse by moving their pollen around. So we got a head, a thorax, and then we have an abdomen. And most of these guys have compound eyes, which we talked about. So that's why I always say my thing with the poor dragonfly, not being able to see the screen, but can be able to see the outside. Now, all insects' mouth parts are similar, right? Similar, but they've been modified, as you can see on the right. For example, if you were a mosquito, your mouth part has been modified into a piercing, right? So you can pierce down into get the blood meal. Butterflies have a long curly one because they're extracting nectar from the back of the flower. And our buddy the fly, that thing that crawls around in your hamburgers and all that, what he's doing is he uses his mouth parts for sopping. Does anybody know what sopping is? Does anybody ever sop at the end of their dinners? Especially if mom's made something with a good gravy. Did you ever sop up mom's gravy? Sop, slurp, there you go. Right? You take a piece of bread, and you dip that into the gravy, and you eat that, sopping it up. You could also, without the bread, you could sop it up. You could lick it, right? That's what flies do. They don't use the bread. But when that fly lands on your hamburger, what he's doing is he's licking he's licking your hamburger, folks. And that's how he's getting food off of that. What they typically do sometimes is they'll lick it, secrete a little bit of digestive enzymes, let it digest, and then lick up the stuff that's being digested. So, yeah. So that's kind of nasty, right? Malpighian tubules would be the excretory system of choice. Trachea again, but this time, especially among the flying insects, the winged insects, if you look in the picture on the right here, you'll notice that what we see is that the trachea, that carry the oxygen throughout, in some areas get expanded into air sacs. In winged insects or in flying organisms, having these air sacs lightens their load. It's kind of like the same reason why birds have hollow bones, right? It lightens the load. If you're a flying organism, you don't want a lot of excess weight. Obviously, you're a flying organism. Interestingly enough, parasitic or aquatic species of insects usually have permanently closed spiracles. If you're parasitic and you're living inside of a host, you're probably getting the oxygen through the diffusion of the skin. So you don't need the spiracles. You're probably small if you're a parasite. And if you're aquatic, spiracles aren't going to work. You're going to need gills or diffusion or something like that. There's this word seedy again. And now this is different than the seedy or the keedy that we were looking at in the worms. And again, I apologize for the redundancy of the name. But the seedy are these little hair-like structures. Not really hair. Only mammals have hair, folks. But if you look down here, that's what I'm talking about. The little fuzzies that are on the head of this insect, those are the seedy. They can detect chemical, mechanical, sound signals. Sound pushes hair around, so they can use that to detect sound signals. The grasshopper in the lower right, the white arrow, if you can see, right kind of beneath that right leg, or right in front of that right leg, is a tympanum. What a tympanum is again, they take a tracheal air sac and they cover it with a membrane, a tympanum. So it's like an eardrum, right? This thing vibrates and that sound is transmitted into the tracheal air sacs and they can sense sound that way. Mosquito larvae, when they're in the water before they become an adult mosquito, what they do is they need to breathe. And they actually have a modification by which they extend this device up to the water the water-air interface, and they actually breathe air. That's why oil kills them. You dump the oil on the water, and it prevents the mosquito larvae from being able to breathe. Dumping oil on water is not a good idea, by the way. Kills off the mosquitoes, but it screws up lots of other things. Pheromones. Nearly all insects have pheromones. They use it to sexual receptivity, to signal danger. Trail markers, like with the ants that you see in the picture. You ever notice that, like when your ants are crawling and you see them coming in through the door of the house, and you mash them, you kill them all up, and then damned if they're not back there in a few minutes. The reason being is it's kind of like Hansel and Gretel. What those ants do is they drop a little bit of a chemical pheromone along the way as they're walking, so that all the other ants know where the path is. The way you get rid of the ants following the same path is you kill off all the ants, obviously, then use something like bleach or some heavy-duty cleaner and clean that area to clean off all those pheromones. If not, they'll just keep walking back to the same place. Life histories, sexual reproduction, land-dwelling critters, typically internal fertilization. Many undergo metamorphosis. So let's look at that for a second. There are two types of metamorphosis. There's something that's called incomplete and something that's called complete. In incomplete metamorphosis, the two pictures on the left, these two, a nymph is a name for a juvenile insect, okay? And these two on the left, these are exhibiting incomplete metamorphosis. Incomplete metamorphosis means that the adult, or I should say the young, the nymphs, just look like smaller adults, okay? So like us, right, humans. In complete metamorphosis, that's the butterfly, the caterpillar, and all that sort of stuff. In complete metamorphosis, you have different stages, like the butterfly on the right. You have the larval stages, what we call instars. Those are the larval stages in insects. And then a pupa, and then out comes an adult. The reason why we think that complete metamorphosis may have come about in insects is because it can allow sort of a division of resources, so that the adult butterfly and the caterpillar that's going to become the adult butterfly of the same species don't eat the same thing. So they can live in the same area, but it decreases resource competition. We talked about dispersal. Excuse me. Dispersal does that, but if you have two different forms, it does it as well. Hold on a second, folks. Excuse me there. All right. Oh my goodness, look at all these. Bristletails, 350 species. Oh, the other one, silverfish. 450 species of silverfish in a group all by themselves. Very interesting insect. You see them around a lot. See a lot of them in Oviedo versus other places I've lived. But they're all members of one group. All the silverfish are. It's a ancient group. Silverfish are an ancient group. Now the other groups, goodness gracious, now I have the hiccups. Somebody needs to scare me. Now how you get rid of hiccups? Oh yeah, they're all over the place there. Around books and things like that. Absolutely. All right, let's look at a couple of orders of insects. I'm definitely not going to go through all of them. I don't have nearly the time to do that, but I do want to point out a few of the more common ones. My goodness. All right. So I broke it down in this slide here between groups of insects with complete and those with incomplete metamorphosis. Okay. Among the complete metamorphosis, we have the Coleoptera. Those are the beetles, biggest group, 350,000 species. And I've looked up some of the roots to help you identify and know which order is what. Coleoptera comes from the Latin or Greek, or I don't know, coleus, which means sheathed wings. Remember, the beetles have a hard cover. They actually have two sets of wings. They have a non-flyable version, which is the hard cover, okay, and then they open that up, and underneath that are the actual flying wings. That's what we mean by sheathed wings. Diptera, the flies and organisms like that, they have two wings. Now, flies oftentimes have a modification to their wings. One of the wings will actually shrink down really, really small, and it's not used for flying, it's used for balance. So, but it's not two wings, right? It was a wing, but we can see in this an evidence of a modification of that wing. The Hymenoptera, the wings of the Hymenoptera, the bees, and all that sort of stuff is thin. It's membranous, okay? It's a hymen. So when I think of hymen, I think of the birds and the bees, because hymen is, that tissue that is torn, generally the first time a female has intercourse. So a Hymenoptera, birds and bees, I remember, okay, bees are Hymenoptera. The Lepidoptera, the butterflies, that's a hummingbird moth, isn't it, Mark? In that picture? The picture you had, looks like a bird. Anyway, they have scaly wings, yeah. The Hymenoptera on the other side, the hawk moth, that's what I meant, I'm sorry. The incomplete metamorphosis, the Hemiptera, they have half wings. It doesn't mean they have a half a wing. It means they have two types of wings. One type is textured and one type is non-textured. The Orthoptera group are like this. This is the spare bear katydid. They have straight wings, orthodox to be straight. Okay. So there's the Coleoptera. A cool looking guy. These appendages, look at that nose. That must be a insect that feeds on, say, nectar or something like that, kind of like the butterfly. The Diptera, the flies, and our buddy the mosquitoes, the Diptera as well. The guy sopping up on your hamburger. Hymenoptera, again, Hymenoptera because the wings are thin tissue. There it is, the hawk moth with its proboscis. That's the Lepidoptera. The Hemiptera with their textured and non-textured wings, and then the straight winged ones, the Orthoptera. A couple little other groups, the Odonata, which are the dragonflies, my favorite group. Dragonflies have been around forever. Their name, Odonata, comes from the fact dragonflies have teeth. Someone that works on your teeth is orthodontist, right? Isoptera, iso means equal, and Ptera is a ring that means wing. So what we're talking about, equal wings. So they have two pairs of equal wings, not in all stages though. Some stages are wingless. These are the termites. And then our buddy the flea is a Siphonoptera. Siphonoptera means without wings, and the siphon part is important because that's how they get their meals. They actually penetrate down. They have a piercing proboscis, so they penetrate down into your skin and get a blood meal, and then they fall off. Attracted to carbon dioxide too, by the way. Fleas are attracted to carbon dioxide. That's how they know when you're in the room. It sense your carbon dioxide, higher carbon dioxide levels. And they're such nice little critters, aren't they? Okay, that's all about the arthropods, and actually that's all about the protostomes. So we don't have any questions on that. I'm going to move into the deuterostomes, which is our last large group. We'll do we won't do the hemichordates. We're going to do the echinoderms, and then we'll get to the chordates later on. We'll spend the rest of the semester on the chordates. So let's move over to the echinoderms now. Interesting group. So the deuterostomes, if you remember, were the organisms. During embryonic development, the mouth forms second. So the blastopore is the anus, then it grows to the other side and makes the mouth. So that's going to include the rhino that you see on the right. This is a sea cucumber. That's a deuterostome. Sea stars are deuterostomes. White sharks are deuterostomes. Humans are deuterostomes. Remember I told you the other day in class I hinted that our closest invertebrate ancestor is the sea stars and sea cucumbers, the echinoderms that we'll talk about. Looking at that rhino reminds me, I was at Busch Gardens a few years ago, and they'd gotten in a new group of rhinos, and the friend of mine, who worked there, said, "You want to go over and see the new rhinos?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." So we go backstage where the rhinos were, and there's a cage. Think that's a black rhino. Yeah, Thomas, I think that's a black rhino. But they were in an enclosure, and the gate that this enclosure was very heavy duty, but the gate they made was one of these really big, steel gates. So I go up there to the gate, my buddy, and we're standing like off the gate, not right on the gate, right, maybe 5 feet away. And the rhino's across the way. He's got to be 100 feet away, maybe 50 feet away. And he looks over, he looks at us, and he turns around and walks right at us. Bam, bam, not even flinching, walks right up to the gate, looks right at us. I'm thinking, man, these guys just got major cojones. This guy had no fear whatsoever. He's like, who is this? I'm going to go up there and exert my dominance, exert my presence. And looking face to face at a rhino, I was like, it's all yours, buddy. Yeah, I don't, you don't want to mess with something like that. What's the horn made up in a rhino? What's that horn made out of? No. Thank God, right? There were. It gets cut off and poached anyway, but if it were ivory, it'd be even worse. I'm looking at the difference between black and white rhinos, and apparently it's a size difference. The mouth is a little different in black rhinos. Let me see if I can then. White rhinos, it looks like it's a little wider. That looks like a white rhino. Yeah, if you look it up online, you see that the mouth is up a little bit differently. That's close, Jennifer. It's hair. Yeah, it's hair, which has keratin in it. It's basically nothing more than a mat of hair. Do you know why they're poached? Do you know the reason why they're cut off? What they're used for? They're used for male combat, obviously, in real life. But you know why idiot humans will cut them off, and even more idiot humans consume them for a reason? Do you know what that is? What I love about humans, complete lack of regard for life other than their own sometimes. Yeah. But what is the one thing that it's touted to supposedly help with? Which is a medical condition, I guess. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Oh, maybe it's not it. Suppose it makes you horny. Okay, aphrodisiac. Supposedly rhino horn is an aphrodisiac. So you're going to destroy some animal so that you can get horny. I'm sorry. That just doesn't fit in with me. All right. Let's look at the echinoderms first. We'll just do the echinoderms today. Echinodermata, spiny skin. That's what that means. Echino, spiny, and derm, of course, is skin. Exclusively marine. No freshwater echinoderms. They have a radial symmetry. We call it pentaradial, which means it's generally in 5s, okay? However, and this is interesting, however, the larvae of an echinoderm, that's this right here, is bilateral. Isn't that neat? So bilaterally symmetric larvae end up developing into pentaradial symmetrical adults. Now, when we get into the chordate chapter, the next one we'll go over, there's something very significant about those larvae being bilateral, but I don't want to kill the lead there. I'm gonna keep that for right now, and we'll talk about it in just a second. Or we'll talk about it when we start talking about the chordates. There's a nervous system, no centralization of function though, so no cerebral ganglion or anything like that. They do have an endoskeleton, which is basically an epidermis that covers the endoskeleton, which is made of, once again, calcium carbonate plates. They're called ossicles. So that's why when you feel the sea stars, they're kind of rough on the outside and they're kind of firm. That's those calcium carbonate skeleton. Those plates are right up underneath the epidermis. And this includes all kinds of critters. The sea stars, which you're familiar with, that's a Florida sea star. I didn't have a picture of a brittle star. We'll look at brittle stars in just a second. Sea urchins and sand dollars. Sea urchin there, sand dollar, sea biscuit. The sea cucumbers. There's another sea urchin there. And another group called the sea pens. or a member of the group that we call the Crinoidea by their real name, or feather stars they're sometimes called. They're really interesting critters. Remember what I said, the inside of the sea urchin is called a test. And you can actually see, if you look closely, the feet. There are feet that stick out. A lot of course, it's covered in spines, but in these areas right here, the narrow areas, they actually have little feet that stick out through there. Now let's look at the inside of your typical sea star. There's something inside of sea stars that's found nowhere else. It's called the water vascular system. This is so cool. It's unique to echinoderms. Only echinoderms have it. So this is something that they came up with completely on their own. And it is a skeletal system, a skeletal. It's a device by which they can move and capture and manipulate prey. Okay. Let me show you the way it works. At the top of an echinoderm, at the top of a sea star, if you look very closely, and I'll show you these in lab, there is a spot that looks a little different than everybody else. That spot is called the madreporite. And the madreporite is actually an opening, a sieve. Water from the outside world pours in through the madreporite, goes through a stone canal, called a stone canal because it's actually got calcium carbonate around it, so it's actually kind of hard. Water then enters into a ring canal. From the ring canal, the water then moves out into radial canals in each of the arms. And in each of those arms are all these little things that look like eyedroppers, don't they? They have a top, the ampulla, and then down below there are these little things called tube feet. Now, when this organism wants its tube feet to extend, like you see right here, and we'll learn a little in just a minute that those tube feet can be used as locomotion, moving them along. So if they wanted to move, what they do is they would push water down into that part of the arm in which they're trying to make those tube feet extend. The ampullae then would then absorb the water and then squeeze, kind of like the top of an eyedropper, squeeze that water into the tube feet, which would cause them to expand. So it's kind of like a hydrostatics thing like the worms had. You can see that they can stick out their tube feet for movement. Here's a little better picture. They can also use their tube feet to actually stick onto things, because what is that ampullae, when you squeeze it and the water shoots out into the feet, when the ampullae lets up, or you unsqueeze it or let it expand, it creates a suction. That's how these things are actually able to open up sea stars or open up mollusks. They wrap all their arms around, and you can see right here, you got these tube feet. Now, some have suckers and some don't have suckers, depending on the species. But on the ones that have suckers, they can wrap those tube feet around, stick them to the shell, right, with the ampulla causing that suction, and gently pull. And they don't have to pull very hard. They don't have to open the mollusk the whole way. All they have to do is open the mollusk far enough for their stomach, which can evert out their mouth, and it descends down into the mantle cavity of the mollusk and then digests it in there. So it's kind of like the fungus, isn't it? Kind of like the external digestion. Pretty cool system, huh? These tube feet. Oh, a little tiny ampulla. That's so neat. Now, if you've seen one at the beach and you flip it over upside down, you might see something like that. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at the ends of the tube feet. And if it's alive, you can actually see them moving. The digestive tract, the stomach, and the anus are in the same place. There's the madreporite in the picture. It's just a little different. It's not quite as obvious as that. The digestive glands and the gonads are found running down the radial arms. There's the ampullae again. The little tube foot that sticks out the end of it is called the podium, and that can secrete adhesive chemicals. It can also secrete chemicals that are de-adhesive chemicals. So it secretes adhesive chemicals to attach on, and then it uses these same other types of chemicals to disconnect. You see, they do have a nervous system, radial nerves, but no centralized function. In the upper right is the picture when I'm talking about their skin. This is looking at a cross section. These are the ossicles, those calcium carbonate plates, and then all of this surrounding would be the epidermis. They have spines that stick out of calcium carbonate protection. Dermal branchia are an accessory respiratory organ. You see, the dermal branchia is thin enough they can actually exchange gases across that dermal bronchium. So it's a way in which they can exchange oxygen, carbon dioxide, and that sort of stuff. Most of them reproduce asexually. Some can split, engage in asexual reproduction, not all species. Gonorchid, males and females. Gametes are released into the water, free-swimming larvae, that free-swimming bilateral larvae, and then eventually settles down into whatever echinoderm it's going to become. Now, here's something really cool about echinoderms. This is a sea cucumber. If you ever messed with a sea cucumber, you find out that they have this really interesting defense mechanism. All that white stuff that you see right there is the internal organs of the sea cucumber. They've been liquefied, and the sea cucumber is then is out of its mouth. The reason why it does that, once again, is hopefully the predator, and the predator will like, oh my God, and leave it alone. It's a defense mechanism. Sea cucumbers can't run, they can't fight back, so it's kind of like, again, the vulture throwing up. It's a way to make predators kind of go, ugh. A buddy of mine found one of these in the Philippines when I was diving there, sea cucumber, and so of course, being who we were, we decided, oh, it looks like a football. So we started throwing it back and forth. My buddy throws the football to me, and about halfway through, we see all this white stuff coming out of it. So the sea cucumber had enough, right? He said, I've had enough. This is not something unique just to sea cucumbers, this regeneration, because the sea cucumber, as you might imagine, if it did not regenerate its internal organs after it did this little defense mechanism, it would die, but they do. They actually, after this is over, they can actually recreate all of their internal organs and be back to being a functional living sea cucumber. So this idea of fragmentation, like we talked about in sponges, in another sense also occurs in these organisms. Like, for example, they can regenerate lost arms, like you see in the one up above the sea cucumber. There is even one species that if you have at least part of the central disc, so if you have the arm and at least part of that central disc, that can grow a whole nother sea star. So it'll fill in the whole rest of the central disc and the other 4 arms. That's just in one species. Other species, they grow an arm. But this one can grow a whole nother sea star. It's kind of cool. Now, before we go on for a second, think about the medical implications of figuring out how sea cucumbers do that. Can you come up with any idea or thoughts about why medical science would be really interested in researching how sea cucumbers are able to regenerate those lost organs, those ones that they liquefy? Thomas, why would we want to do the same so we can dissuade predators? Okay. If we could figure out how sea cucumbers do this, and if we could cause that to, if we could mimic that in humans, what medical benefit would that be? If we could get humans to do the same thing that sea cucumbers do when they regenerate those organs, what benefit would that be for humans? There you go. We could figure out how to grow organs, couldn't we? You got a bad liver? We'll grow you another one. I wonder about that at some time in the future, if we get to the point where replacing body parts is similar to replacing the tires on your car. I wonder if human beings will still, those that do, I wonder if there'll be quite the premium on healthy eating and healthy living. Yeah, that's exactly what I just said. Yeah, I wonder if people would say, well, the hell with it, who cares? I can smoke 8 packs of cigarettes a day and get new lungs when I need them. Okay, let's look at the classes of echinoderms to wrap this group up. The first class is the Asteroidea group. Those are the sea stars, aster stars, so that fits very nicely in there. Sea stars and these cool things called the sea daisies. Down below, that's a sea daisy. Not very big, they're only about a centimeter. There's only 3 species of them known, and in '86, a species was discovered, a sea daisy, was it Xyloplax janetae, that only grows on the decaying wooden hulls of ships that have sunk. It's the only place it's found. You think, what did they do before there were wooden ships that were sinking? Well, you know, wood, trees, and stuff falls into the ocean, and maybe that provided some sort of ecosystem. But it'd be interesting to find out if the populations of sea daisies has increased, especially this one species, since human beings began traveling the oceans and sinking wooden ships. Talk about a specific habitat, right? They're only found there. Members of the Asteroidea are very important predators. Some are keystone species. This is the crown of thorns, and this is a keystone species. Keystone species, you remember, are the species we said that if you removed it would have the greatest effect on the ecosystem. And oftentimes we think of that as being it'll cause bad things to the ecosystem. Well, sometimes keystone species, and in the case of the crown of thorns, it's the other way around. If we remove the crown of thorns from an area, it actually would cause the ecosystem to be more sustainable. All right, so sometimes keystone species actually are those species that if removed them makes things better. And oftentimes, crown of thorns and things that are keystone species like that are invasives. Okay, they weren't there to begin with, but they've invaded. They become the keystone species because they change the ecosystem. You know, ecosystem was such way, all of a sudden the crown of thorns began to move in, they begin to populate, all of a sudden the ecosystem changes completely. That would be a keystone species, the one that has such a change. In the Asteroidea, we say that the central disk is not sharply demarcated, so it's not obvious there's a central disk. You'll see what I mean in just a second when I show you the brittle stars on the next one. And the legs, if you notice, have a taper. They taper from the disk out to the ends. Usually 5 pentaradial, but not always. You see in the hand, that guy's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. And that one on the right is, what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's not always 5. All right, that disk thing, brittle stars are denoted by the fact that they have a very sharply demarcated central disk. It's very obvious. And the arms don't taper. They're, you know, maybe at the tips a little bit, but for the most part, they're straight all the way down. Now, the reason why they're called brittle stars is because if you mess with them, you see the one on the bottom, the Amphioidea urtica, if you mess with them, they'll shed their arms. They'll autonomize their arms. This is the word. They'll autonomize their arms with the idea of, it's kind of like the lizard losing its tail. Hopefully the predator will go after that. And of course, they can grow those arms back. Brittle stars do that readily. That's why they're called brittle stars. You mess with them just a little bit and they're shedding off their arms. They're very brittle. You can think of it like that. They can also use those arms. This one right here is on land and moving and crawling around. They don't move very efficiently. They do have tube feet, but they don't have the suction cups. So they use their tube feet for moving, and they use them kind of like the seedy and the worms to provide traction to pull themselves along. This is a species of the Florida brittle star. A friend might have one of those in the aquarium. Think about brittle stars, you put them in the aquarium, you never see them again. They like to hide under stuff, and they only come out at night, typically. A lot of these guys are found way down at the bottom of the ocean, too, which is kind of interesting. Because first, before we went to the bottom of the ocean, we didn't realize. We thought there was very little down there. Come to find out there's quite a bit. And if you see the picture in the background that I've got sort of the backlit on this thing, you can see that's just a mass of sea stars. And that's taken at depth. I don't know what depth is, but that's a bunch of sea stars at the bottom. The Echinoidea, the sea urchins, the sand dollars, and the sea biscuits, they all have a test. They're armless. They don't have arms, but they do have tube feet. The tube feet being found there, 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 there. 5 rows of tube feet. A little bit clearer on the one to the right. And then all the other space in between is where the spines stick out. Double rows of tube feet with protectable spines for defense and locomotion. All right, coolest thing in the world about echinoids, though, before we go on. Echinoidea are grazers. And if you look at the bottom of one, you see they got these little teeth. Okay, and those little teeth move along and they chew up grazing material. Well, if you look inside, if you ever broken open a sea dollar, if you ever shake a sea dollar, you can hear the pieces inside. You'll find this little star-shaped organ on the inside. What that thing is actually something called Aristotle's lantern. It's called Aristotle's lantern because the drawing right here is the one that Aristotle made. But those little teeth are these little teeth right there. Look at the mechanism that they use. Look how incredibly simple yet innovative this thing is. So you got these calcareous plates, and you got a protractor muscle and a retractor muscle. So basically those muscles pulling in those directions cause these plates, if you can see my hand in the picture, to move like this. All right, so those plates move like this, and the teeth are at the bottom, so when the plate moves in, the tooth moves out, so it's a hinge. So they can move those calcareous plates back and forth, which in turn move those teeth, and those little teeth are nipping away with those little tiny muscles. Isn't that neat? Aristotle, such a smart guy, man. He figured all this. Well, I don't know if what he figured out. He certainly drew it. Wish I had that artistic ability like he's got. Incredible. Oh, look at this group, the Crinoidea. These are weird. Sea lilies, feather stars. This is what we call a living fossil again. Remember, living fossils are things that have changed very little since sometime in the past. They've changed very little since the Cambrian explosion. Dioecious again, so we got males and females. They have a free swimming larvae, a sessile juvenile, and then in some organisms, the sessile adult sea lilies are sessile, but in some of them we have free-moving adults, like feather stars. They're suspension feeders, folks, so their mouths face upward. They have a U-shaped gut, so the anus is right next to the mouth, just like the torsion in the poor snail, right? So their mouth and their anus faces up, and then they have all these, which is their modifications of their arms and their tubes sticking up, and they basically, as I said, they're suspension feeders, and they find food and drag it into their mouth. What's really kind of cool about feather stars, it probably freak you out, feather stars can crawl. Look at that, that's a feather star crawling. So they're able actually to crawl upon those arms and feet. If you saw something like that, you think spider, right? It's not a spider. Sometimes these have also been called sea pens because they look like, they look like the old feather pens. What do they call those? Quills that people use. That's always a group that throws everybody when you think about the Echinoidea or Echinodermata. You got the sea stars, the brittle stars, and even the sea urchins. If you notice, you look on the sea urchins and the sand dolls, they have that star arrangement on there. But these and then the sea cucumbers are usually the types of echinoderms that people forget or don't think about. Sea cucumbers, they look like a cucumber. Common in deep ocean, their endoskeleton is greatly reduced. They're very soft and pliable. And the tube feet have actually been modified into feeding tentacles, like you see here. This is a sea cucumber. And they also have some tube feet on the side as well. These are detritivores, right? They're not predators. You don't have to worry about being attacked by a sea cucumber. I think I'd be embarrassed to say I was attacked by a sea cucumber. But they move along the bottom and eat detritus. Detritus is decaying organic material, just bits and pieces of stuff that's on the bottom. And we eat them. This is actually a sea cucumber dish. I've never eaten sea cucumber, so I don't know. I don't know what it tastes like. Now, they can exchange gases through something called a respiratory tree. And a respiratory tree, again, is nothing more than a highly vascularized piece of tissue. In this case, the respiratory tree, the tree part is all of the vessels coming together to form like a tree. But it's highly vascularized tissue by which they can exchange gases through. And they have that respiratory tree in their anus, so they breathe basically through their anus, completely opposite from us. And there you can see again that defense mechanism. Very bizarre. All right, well, that's the echinoderms, and that's the deuterostomes. We only got a few minutes. We'll stop here, but this is where we're going to go next, folks. We'll finish up the rest of the semester talking about all the different types of chordates. So we'll do that next week. We do not have class next Thursday, remember? We do have one more lab, and that's the Shark lab. So we have one lecture next week and then one or two the week after, depending on how much material we get through in 34, okay? All right, folks. If you don't have any questions for me, that's all I have for today. Stop the recording.